My name is Meher. I was raised in the throbbing heart of Mumbai, where the air smells of ambition and fried street food, where the local trains crush you just enough to remind you you're alive. I grew up under the firm voice of a disciplined father, the kind who wore his respectability like a uniform. My mother was softer, but always watching my grades, my friends, the length of my sleeves. In our home, Hindu rituals were followed with mechanical devotion. I never questioned it. I never even truly felt it. It was like brushing my teeth, a duty, not a desire. I was the eldest daughter, the good one. I was supposed to climb the ladder, marry within caste, smile at relatives, and never bring shame. I obeyed, mostly, until the day I boarded that flight to Dubai. I wasn't running from my family, I told myself. I had landed a dream job in a multinational architecture firm. I was moving up, making something of myself. But deep down, I wanted air. I wanted to breathe without someone measuring my lungs. Dubai was intoxicating. Skyscrapers that dared to touch heaven. Cultures clashing and coexisting in glittering silence. And anonymity, the sweet drug of being unrecognized in a sea of people. I shared a flat with 2 other Indian girls who were chasing careers and freedom. We laughed about marriage proposals, argued about politics, and cried about loneliness that sat beside us like an uninvited guest. And then came him, Asim. It started like every boring corporate tale. A boardroom meeting, a project presentation, him seated diagonally from me, eyes calm, body language almost invisible, until he spoke and his voice slid across the room like smoke. Measured, deep, quiet confidence. The first time he smiled at me, I felt it crack something open inside me, not butterflies, earthquakes. He was Pakistani. I found that out after our 3rd meeting. I blinked, registered it, and shrugged, because at that moment he wasn't a nationality. He was a man who made my world tilt. We began talking, slowly at first, like children touching the edges of fire. Work messages became conversations, became shared songs, became late-night confessions. He told me about Lahore, the way poets write about lost love, its chai stalls, its old city walls, the scent of rain-soaked bricks. I told him about Mumbai's madness, how we waded through floods and honked through heartbreaks. I told him about how my city loved too loudly and broke too silently. We became an us before we even kissed. But the world doesn't allow love like ours to breathe freely. The whispers began in my flat. "You're seeing a Pakistani guy? Are you serious?" Friends back home grew cold. One girl from college messaged me just to say, "You're betraying India, Meher." I laughed it off, at first, until I couldn't. The day I mentioned Asim to my father, casually, without context, his eyes narrowed. He didn't even let me finish. "Pakistani? What are you thinking? You'll shame us all." That night, I cried. Not because of what he said, but because for the first time, I realized I was choosing something, or someone, outside the borders drawn around me since birth. Asim and I kept going, building a world between us with fragile hope and stubborn hearts. But love like ours carries knives behind rose petals. Then came the conversation we'd both been dreading. He looked at me, voice softer than usual. "Meher, If we want a future, you'd have to consider Islam. The word Islam rang louder than it should have. I wasn't unfamiliar. India taught me plenty, mostly through biased headlines and hushed warnings. My parents never hated Muslims, but they carried the fear of them like inherited debt. Islam was foreign, heavy, not mine, and I told him that. I told him I wouldn't convert for love. That love should be enough. That religion shouldn't matter if hearts matched. He didn't argue, he just nodded, slowly. That silence killed me more than any fight. That night, he didn't message me, nor the next. And in those days, I felt something collapse inside. Not just because he was gone, but because I had realized I wasn't just in love with him. I was in love with what we represented. And now it was gone. That was the beginning of the unraveling. But not the end, because what followed changed everything I thought I knew about love, faith, and the fire in my own soul. After Asim disappeared from my life, I thought the ache would soften with time. It didn't. He didn't ghost me. He was too gentle for that. But he backed away slowly, like someone retreating from a cliff they couldn't save. And I let him go, lips tight, pride louder than pain. But once the silence settled, it wasn't him I missed most. It was what he'd unknowingly introduced into my world, something I didn't dare touch then, Islam. At first, I avoided it like a wound. I didn't want to look too closely, but curiosity is stubborn, and in the absence of love, I needed answers. Not about him, but about why he believed in something enough to walk away from me for it. It began quietly. Late-night articles, videos of converts, stories of women like me, skeptical, modern, from cities like Delhi, Mumbai, New York, who had once scoffed at the idea of God having rules. I found stories of doctors, philosophers, ex-atheists, engineers, people who didn't need religion, but found it anyway. I didn't believe what they said at first, but I couldn't ignore the calm in their voices. They weren't brainwashed, they weren't oppressed, they were grounded. I downloaded an English translation of the Quran one night. I didn't plan to read it seriously, just wanted to see what Asim had possibly found in it that made him choose it over me. I remember the first line I ever truly read with attention. This is the book about which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of God. No doubt. I scoffed, and yet I kept reading. For weeks I read in secret. One verse a night, sometimes a chapter, sometimes a page that I reread 10 times. What struck me wasn't fire and brimstone. It was logic, precision, patterns, justice. I expected blind faith. What I found was a challenge, a demand to think. It asked questions I had buried in childhood. What is your purpose? Where does morality come from? Do you believe your heart has no owner? If you're so certain of science, who created the laws it obeys? I sat with those verses in silence, and slowly I began to understand something no one had explained to me growing up. That faith doesn't have to be inherited. It can be discovered. And when it's discovered, it becomes unshakable. But Islam wasn't just a book. It was a system, a worldview. So I pushed further. I watched debates. I studied logic behind the 5 pillars. I read about Prophet Muhammad (sallam) from non-Muslim historians. I compared scriptures. I asked questions about things I thought were oppressive, hijab, inheritance, prayer, only to realize how twisted my understanding had been. Islam wasn't the cage. My ignorance was. One day, I closed the Quran after reading a verse that broke me. Perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you. Allah knows, and you do not know. Quran 2:216. I cried that night because I finally saw it. Asim was never the destination. He was the path. He had introduced me to something and stepped aside so I could find it on my own. If he had pushed me, I would have rejected it out of pride. But in his silence, I was forced to wrestle with the truth alone, and that made it mine. The day I took my Shahada, I was alone in my apartment. No imams, no audience. Just me and my phone open to a YouTube tutorial, my trembling voice whispering Arabic I had memorized over weeks. Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul Allah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There was no flash of light, no choir of angels, but I felt my soul exhale. The next time I saw Asim was months later, randomly at a cafe in Dubai Marina. He didn't recognize me at first. Then he saw the hijab, his eyes widened, his lips parted. You? I smiled. Not for you, I said gently. For him. We didn't get back together. Our time had passed, but we both knew something sacred had remained. Today, I'm still living in Dubai. Still the daughter my family never saw coming. Still the woman who once believed freedom meant breaking every rule, until I found the one rule worth living for.